So you're not saying girls can't master the instruments, you're saying girls aren't allowed to play rock and roll because of the connotation. Rock and roll.
For decades, rock icon Joan Jett has been a symbol of rebellion, strength, and untamed charisma, leaving fans mesmerized by her music and mystique. But now, at 66, the queen of rock and roll is breaking her silence on a deeply personal secret she's kept hidden all these years. Get ready to discover the untold truth behind the woman who made us all believe in rock and roll, the rise of the Runaways. When Joan Jett co-founded the Runaways, she wasn't just starting a band, she was starting a revolution. It was the mid-1970s, and the idea of an all-girl rock band was almost unheard of. Women in music were largely relegated to singing pop ballads or playing supporting roles in male-led acts. But Joan had other plans. She wanted to form a band that wasn't just about music, but about breaking down barriers and flipping the script. The seeds of the Runaways were planted at Rodney Bingenheimer's English Disco, the same glam rock haven where Joan had soaked up the rebellious energy of the scene. It was here that she crossed paths with Sandy West, a fiery drummer with big ambitions and even bigger talent. The two instantly clicked, united by their shared dream of making loud, unapologetic rock music. Enter Kim Fowley, a music producer with a knack for spotting talent and an eye for controversy. Fowley saw the potential in Joan and Sandy's vision and set out to shape it into something explosive. Through his connections, he brought together a group of teenage girls who would go on to form the Runaways: lead guitarist Lita Ford, bassist Jackie Fox, and lead singer Cherie Currie. From the start, the Runaways were different. They weren't just a group of girls playing instruments. They were a band with a mission. Their music was raw, energetic, and rebellious, a direct challenge to the male-dominated rock scene. Songs like Cherry Bomb were full of attitude, with lyrics that announced they weren't here to be sweet or tame. They were here to rock, and they weren't asking for permission. But while their music was bold, the reactions to it were mixed at best. Critics didn't know what to make of an all-girl rock band, often focusing more on their looks and youth than their talent. The press labeled them as a novelty act, dismissing their music as a gimmick. Rolling Stone, the pinnacle of rock journalism at the time, didn't take them seriously at all. The sexism extended beyond the media. Audiences were often hostile, especially in the United States. Joan later recalled performing for crowds that would spit on the band while they were on stage. It was a level of vitriol that shocked even her, and the emotional toll was immense. But instead of letting it crush them, the girls leaned into their defiance. For Joan, every jeer, every spitball, and every dismissive comment was just another reason to play harder. While the Runaways struggled for respect in America, they found an entirely different reception abroad. In Japan, they were treated like rock royalty, with fans greeting them at airports in scenes reminiscent of Beatlemania. Their albums topped charts in countries like Japan and Australia, proving that their music resonated, even if their home country wasn't ready for them. Despite their international success, life in the Runaways was far from glamorous. Behind the scenes, the band faced immense pressure from all sides. Fowley, while instrumental in their rise, was also a deeply controversial figure. His treatment of the girls was often abusive, both emotionally and psychologically. He withheld money, subjected them to relentless criticism, and manipulated them in ways that would later become the subject of serious allegations. The industry's exploitation didn't stop there. Cherie Currie, just 16 at the time, was pressured into wearing provocative outfits and posing for suggestive photo shoots, moves that caused tension within the band and added to their frustrations. The girls were often fed drugs to keep up with the grueling demands of their schedule, and their youth made them especially vulnerable to the industry's darker side. The strain of life on the road and the constant battles with sexism, exploitation, and internal conflicts began to take a toll. Joan, who had always been the backbone of the band, found herself increasingly frustrated. She wanted the Runaways to be about the music, but it felt like everything else, image, scandals, and infighting, was overshadowing their talent. Tensions within the band grew as their vision for the future began to diverge. Joan wanted to stick to their raw rock roots, while other members, like Lita Ford, leaned toward a more traditional heavy metal sound. The clashing personalities and mounting pressures eventually became too much to bear. In 1979, after just 4 years and 5 albums, the Runaways officially disbanded. For Joan, it was devastating. The band had been her dream, her vision, and to see it fall apart felt like a personal failure. In the aftermath, she spiraled into a period of anger and confusion. In her documentary Bad Reputation, Joan admitted to drinking heavily, starting as early as 8 a.m. some days. She struggled to make sense of the world. How could something she had poured her heart and soul into fall apart so completely? But even in her darkest moments, Joan's fire never fully went out. The Runaways may have been over, but the lessons Joan learned during those years, the resilience, the defiance, and the drive to prove the doubters wrong, would stay with her. Those years on stage, battling hostile audiences and fighting for respect, had forged her into a rock warrior. The Runaways were more than just a band. They were a statement, a challenge to the music industry, and a glimpse of what was possible when women refused to be confined by societal expectations. And while their time together was short, their impact was undeniable. They laid the groundwork for future generations of women in rock, proving that girls could play, and play loud. For Joan, the breakup of the Runaways wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. But the scars from those years, both the triumphs and the traumas, would stay with her as she set out to carve her own path in the world of rock and roll. Joan Jett's journey to rock stardom. Joan Jett's story begins in the suburban streets of Wynwood, Pennsylvania, where she was born Joan Marie Larkin on September 22, 1958. Her early life was marked by a love for music, though it wasn't until she received her first guitar at the age of 13 that her passion began to take shape. It was a Christmas gift, one that would unknowingly set the foundation for an extraordinary career. As Joan strummed her first chords, the connection was instant. There was something about the raw power of rock music that captivated her. Her first experience with the world of guitar lessons, however, wasn't as inspiring. The teacher, reflecting the dismissive attitudes of the time, told her outright that girls can't play rock and roll. It was a sentiment Joan would encounter repeatedly throughout her early career. But even as a young teenager, she wasn't one to back down. Rather than let the comment deter her, it became fuel for her growing fire. When she was 15, her family relocated to West Covina, California. This move proved pivotal, taking Joan from the relatively quiet streets of Wynwood to the heart of California's thriving glam rock scene. It was a world of bright lights, bold fashion, and unrestrained energy, a far cry from the more conservative environment she had grown up in. For Joan, it felt like stepping into a universe that finally made sense, a place where her dreams of rock and roll didn't feel so far-fetched. One of the hubs of this new world was Rodney Bingenheimer's English Disco, a hotspot where teenagers gathered to celebrate glam rock's rebellious spirit. The club wasn't just about the music, it was a lifestyle, a community where self-expression reigned supreme. Joan became a regular, immersing herself in the scene and soaking up the electric atmosphere. The energy of the disco and the unapologetic individuality of its patrons resonated deeply with her. It was during this time that Joan discovered Suzi Quatro, the leather-clad rocker who became her ultimate inspiration. Suzi wasn't just a musician, she was a trailblazer. At a time when women were rarely seen on rock stages, Suzi stood front and center, owning her power and proving that women could do more than just sing, they could dominate. For Joan, Suzi represented possibility. Here was a woman who wasn't afraid to defy the norms, who didn't care what others thought, and who carved out her space in a male-dominated industry. Inspired by Suzi's example, Joan began to craft her own identity. She adopted the last name Jett, a sharp, dynamic name that matched her burgeoning persona. Her wardrobe transformed as well, with black leather jackets, tight jeans, and her signature shaggy black haircut becoming staples. These weren't just aesthetic choices. They were declarations of who she was and what she stood for. However, as Joan took her first steps into the music industry, she quickly realized how deeply ingrained sexism was. The idea of a teenage girl playing guitar and leading a rock band was met with skepticism at best and outright ridicule at worst. Industry executives questioned her seriousness, critics dismissed her abilities, and even audiences seemed more interested in her looks than her music. Despite these challenges, Joan remained undeterred. She spent hours practicing her guitar, refining her craft, and building the confidence she would need to stand her ground. Her determination wasn't just about proving herself, it was about proving that women could do anything men could do in the world of rock and roll. In the glam rock scene, Joan found not only inspiration but also a sense of belonging. It was a space where misfits and dreamers gathered, united by their love for music and their desire to break free from societal expectations. Joan soaked in the energy of the clubs, watching and learning from the performers who took the stage. Each performance she witnessed became a lesson, each chord a step closer to her own aspirations. Her experiences at Rodney Bingenheimer's English Disco and within the broader glam rock community gave her the confidence to begin performing herself. She wasn't content to simply admire from afar. She wanted to be the one on stage, the one commanding the crowd's attention. And while the road was anything but smooth, Joan's determination never wavered. What set Joan apart during these formative years was her ability to channel adversity into motivation. Every time someone doubted her, dismissed her, or tried to diminish her, she responded by working harder. Her focus was unshakable, her drive relentless. Joan wasn't just playing for herself. She was playing for every girl who had ever been told she couldn't. Her early years in California also marked the beginning of her journey as a songwriter. Joan wasn't content to simply play covers of existing songs. She wanted to create her own music, to tell her own stories. This desire for creative expression would later become a defining feature of her career. But even in these early days, it was clear that Joan had a unique voice and vision. Joan's early struggles didn't just shape her music, they shaped her character. The rejection, the sexism, and the uphill battles she faced all contributed to the raw, rebellious energy that would later define her sound. She wasn't interested in conforming or playing by the rules. She wanted to shatter expectations and carve out her own path. Solo career and reinvention. After the Runaways disbanded, Joan Jett found herself at a crossroads. The band's breakup had been devastating, leaving her angry, confused, and unsure of her next move. But if there was one thing Joan had learned during her time with the Runaways, it was resilience. She wasn't ready to give up, not by a long shot. Joan knew she wanted to continue making music, but breaking into the industry as a solo artist wasn't going to be easy. The Runaways had given her a taste of fame, but their reputation was still viewed as more of a novelty act than a serious musical force, at least in the United States. Joan was determined to change that. She started by heading to Europe, where she recorded her first solo album. The self-titled record, later known as Bad Reputation, was a mix of gritty rock tracks that showcased Joan's raw talent and rebellious spirit. The album was released overseas, but when Joan brought it back to the US, she hit an almost impenetrable wall. Incredibly, 23 different record labels rejected the album. 23. It was a brutal and demoralizing experience, but Joan refused to back down. She believed in the music she had created and knew it deserved to be heard. Instead of waiting for the industry to come around, she decided to take matters into her own hands. This is where Kenny Laguna entered the picture. A seasoned producer and Joan's biggest supporter, Kenny saw her potential when few others did. Together, they made a bold decision. They would release the album themselves. They scraped together their savings, borrowed money from friends, and founded Blackheart Records, a fiercely independent label that would become a cornerstone of Joan's career. Blackheart Records wasn't just a business decision, It was a declaration of independence. In an industry dominated by gatekeepers, Joan and Kenny were carving out their own path, one that allowed them complete creative freedom. They printed up copies of Bad Reputation and began selling them out of the trunk of their car at shows. It was grassroots, it was scrappy, and it was exactly what Joan needed. To bring her music to life on stage, Joan placed an ad looking for musicians to join her new band. Enter the Blackhearts, a group of talented musicians who shared Joan's vision and grit. With her band in place, Joan hit the road, playing gigs wherever she could, dive bars, small clubs, and anywhere else that would have her. The hard work paid off when Bad Reputation started gaining traction. The title track became a rock anthem, a defiant middle finger to all the critics who had doubted her. The song's lyrics, "I don't give a damn about my bad reputation," captured the essence of who Joan was and what she stood for. It wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. But Joan wasn't done. In 1981, she released her second album with the Blackhearts' I Love Rock and Roll. The title track, a cover of an Arrows song, was a runaway success. It shot to the top of the Billboard charts, where it stayed for 7 consecutive weeks. The song became one of the best-selling singles of all time and solidified Joan's status as a rock icon. The music video for I Love Rock and Roll, featuring Joan's signature leather jacket and unshakable swagger, became a staple on MTV, which was just beginning to revolutionize the music industry. The exposure helped catapult Joan to superstardom. Suddenly, the same media that had once dismissed her was singing her praises. The success of I Love Rock and Roll was followed by a string of hits, including Crimson and Clover, a bold cover that kept the original pronouns intact, showcasing Joan's fearless authenticity. She was on top of the world, but as with any career, maintaining that level of success came with its own set of challenges. By the mid-1980s, Joan faced the difficult task of following up her massive success. While she continued to release albums, they didn't achieve the same level of commercial triumph as I Love Rock and Roll. Critics were often harsh, and the industry's focus on trends made it harder for her brand of raw rock and roll to compete. Her 1983 album and 1984's Glorious Results of a Misspent Youth struggled to produce major hits, and by the time Good Music was released in 1986, Joan's commercial momentum had slowed. Still, she never lost her passion for performing. She continued to tour tirelessly, bringing her music to fans across the globe, whether it's sold-out arenas or small-town festivals. In 1987, Joan took a detour into acting, starring opposite Michael J. Fox in the drama Light of Day. While the film didn't earn rave reviews, its theme song, written by Bruce Springsteen, became a minor hit. This brief stint in Hollywood gave Joan a new perspective and allowed her to explore other creative outlets, but music remained her true calling. Her career saw a resurgence in 1988 with the album Up Your Alley, which featured the top 10 hit I Hate Myself for Loving You. The song, with its blistering guitar riffs and catchy chorus, brought Joan back to the forefront of rock music and proved she still had the ability to create hits. As the 1990s approached, Joan faced a changing musical landscape. Grunge and alternative rock were taking over, and the industry's focus shifted once again. But Joan found herself embraced by the emerging punk and grunge scenes, which viewed her as a pioneer and kindred spirit. Bands like Nirvana and Bikini Kill cited her as an influence, and she collaborated with artists who shared her DIY ethos. The hidden struggles behind the fame. Joan Jett's rise to fame wasn't all spotlights and screaming fans. It came with a heavy cost. As she climbed to the top of the rock world, she quickly learned that the glare of fame wasn't always kind. Behind the leather jackets and confident swagger was a woman grappling with the darker side of success. In the early days of her solo career, Joan had poured her energy into proving herself and fighting to be taken seriously. But as the hits started rolling in, so did the relentless media scrutiny. Reporters weren't just interested in her music, they wanted access to every corner of her life. Paparazzi followed her everywhere, snapping photos and creating sensationalized stories that often veered far from the truth. the constant intrusion took its toll. For someone as fiercely private as Joan, the loss of anonymity was overwhelming. It wasn't just the headlines, it was the feeling of being watched all the time, as if every move she made was up for public debate. The pressure to maintain her image, the fearless, untouchable rock star, was immense, but it didn't leave much room for vulnerability. Joan's relationships also became collateral damage in the chaos of fame. Friends and family found themselves dragged into the spotlight, often unwillingly. The strain of balancing a demanding career with personal connections created distance, and Joan sometimes found herself feeling isolated, even in the middle of a crowd. Perhaps the hardest part was the self-doubt that crept in during quieter moments. Despite her tough exterior, Joan wasn't immune to the weight of expectations. The music industry, fans, and media all seemed to have an opinion about who she should be and what she should do next. Was she staying true to herself? Was she doing enough? These questions haunted her, especially during the inevitable career lulls when the hits weren't coming as easily. As Joan grappled with these struggles, her mental health took a hit. The pressure to always be on, coupled with the demands of constant touring and performing, left her physically and emotionally drained. Joan admitted that there were times when she considered walking away from it all. The joy she once felt on stage seemed overshadowed by the relentless demands of fame. But true to form, Joan didn't let the darkness win. Instead, she leaned into the very thing that had always given her strength: music. Writing songs became her way of processing the chaos around her. The stage, despite all the challenges, was still her sanctuary, a place where she could channel her frustration, anger, and vulnerability into something powerful. Her fans played a big role in pulling her through. Joan often spoke about the energy she felt during live performances, and how the connection with her audience reminded her of why she started playing music in the first place. It wasn't just about the fame or the accolades. It was about creating something real, something that resonated. Joan also found solace in her independence. As the head of her own record label, Blackheart Records, she had the freedom to make decisions on her own terms. She wasn't beholden to industry executives who cared more about profits than art. This autonomy allowed her to create music that felt authentic, even if it didn't always top the charts. Health crisis and near-death experience. In the early 2010s, Joan Jett faced a challenge unlike anything she had encountered in her career. It wasn't a battle against sexism or a fight for respect in the music industry, it was a battle for her life. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a stubborn cold. Joan, ever the workhorse, brushed it off. She had shows to play, fans to entertain, and no time to rest. But the symptoms didn't go away, instead they got worse. What started as a nagging cough and fatigue spiraled into something much more serious. Joan found herself struggling to breathe and constantly drained of energy. Still, she pushed through, unwilling to cancel performances. The show must go on wasn't just a cliché to her, it was a personal philosophy. Eventually, her body forced her to stop. Joan was hospitalized, and the diagnosis was severe: pneumonia. But that wasn't all. Doctors discovered she was also suffering from endocarditis, a rare and life-threatening infection of the heart's inner lining. It was a sobering moment. If left untreated, endocarditis could have had catastrophic consequences. For someone like Joan, who thrived on movement, creativity, and connection, being sidelined was devastating. Her world, once filled with the high-energy chaos of touring and performing, suddenly came to a screeching halt. The physical toll of the illness was immense. Joan underwent aggressive treatments, including powerful antibiotics, and spent weeks under close medical supervision. The emotional toll was just as heavy. For Joan, who had always prided herself on her resilience, being vulnerable was unfamiliar territory. The reality of her condition forced her to confront her own mortality in a way she never had before. Stepping away from the stage was one of the hardest decisions she'd ever made. Performing wasn't just a job for Joan, it was her lifeline, her way of connecting with the world. Being unable to play her guitar, command a stage, or feel the rush of a crowd left her feeling adrift. She worried about disappointing her fans, the people who had stood by her through so much. But even in the midst of this crisis, Joan's fighting spirit remained intact. She leaned on her inner circle, friends, family, and longtime collaborator Kenny Laguna, for support. Their unwavering encouragement reminded her that it was okay to slow down, to prioritize her health, and to let others step in when she needed help. The experience became a wake-up call. Joan realized how much she had taken her health for granted over the years. Touring non-stop, running on adrenaline, and ignoring the warning signs her body gave her had taken a toll. This time she had no choice but to listen. As she slowly regained her strength, Joan found a new appreciation for self-care. She adopted healthier habits, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and rest. It wasn't just about recovering from the illness, it was about ensuring she could continue doing what she loved for years to come. Her time away from the stage also gave her a chance to reflect. Joan had always been laser-focused on her career, pushing herself to the limit to prove she could keep up with and surpass her peers. But this experience reminded her that even the toughest rock stars aren't invincible. She began to embrace the idea that stepping back doesn't mean stepping down. When Joan finally returned to the stage, it was nothing short of triumphant. Her performances had always been electrifying, but now they carried a renewed intensity. Every note, every chord, every lyric seemed to come from a deeper place. Joan wasn't just playing music, she was celebrating life. Her fans noticed the difference. The woman who had once been sidelined by illness was now back in full force, more passionate than ever. For Joan, each performance felt like a victory, a testament to her resilience and her refusal to let anything, not even a life-threatening illness, keep her down. She also used her platform to raise awareness about the importance of health. Joan spoke openly about her experience, urging others to take care of themselves and not ignore the warning signs their bodies might be sending. She reminded her fans that health isn't something to be taken for granted, no matter how unstoppable you might feel. Joan Jett's legacy and the secret revealed. But even icons have secrets, and for decades Joan kept a deeply personal one hidden from the world. At 66, she's finally ready to reveal it, a secret that sheds light on the complexity of her journey and the battles she fought behind the scenes. For much of her life, Joan struggled with her identity. Not the kind of identity tied to her music or image, that was always clear. It was the quieter, more personal questions that weighed on her. Who was she outside of the leather jackets and power chords? Could she be vulnerable and still command respect? Did she have to live up to the rock star image every second of her life? Joan's refusal to label her sexuality became a central part of her mystique, but it also came from a place of self-preservation. In an industry that was already hostile to women, Joan feared that being open about her identity might close even more doors. It wasn't just about protecting her career, it was about protecting herself. There were other struggles too. Joan, for all her confidence on stage, often wrestled with self-doubt in private. The pressure to constantly perform, to live up to the expectations of being Joan Jett, was enormous. Behind the scenes, there were moments when she questioned if she was enough. Could she still be the rock and roll powerhouse people expected her to be, even as she navigated the inevitable changes that come with growing older? Through it all, Joan chose to keep these struggles private. She built a wall between her public persona and her inner life, partly out of necessity and partly because she believed her fans came to her for strength, not vulnerability. But over time, she realized that sharing her truth could be its own form of strength. Revealing her secret now, Joan hopes to show her fans that even the toughest among us have moments of doubt, confusion, and fear. By speaking openly about her struggles with identity and self-doubt, she's sending a powerful message. It's okay to be unsure, to question yourself, and to take time to figure things out. Joan's decision to open up also reflects the way she's always approached her career, on her own terms. She's not sharing her story because she feels pressured or obligated. She's doing it because she's ready, because she believes it's the right time, and because she knows her journey can inspire others. Joan Jett's journey reminds us to embrace authenticity and courage. Her revelation inspires fans worldwide. If you love this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating insights into the lives of your favorite icons.